Welcome to the Clayton Vance Podcast, where we discuss the art and soul of architecture and explain why the world looks the way it does. Today, our guest is Mike Hathorne, who is an author. He is an educator, urban strategist, and consultant who has specialized in demographic change, in housing markets, and community design. Now, he's been working in the development arena for 30 plus years, and we're super excited to have him on. And what this is podcast number 2 of a series of 3 and possibly more. But in terms of today, what we're doing is we're looking at zoning, density, and mixed use, and zoning in the context of all of those things. And so I encourage you to watch the previous episode to this so you get an understanding of Mike, his background, where he comes from, and why he can talk so extensively on this subject. And we are going to just dive right into this topic, which is density, which is, in all honesty, a 4-letter word for so many people out there. And Mike, why is it bad?
Well, first, it's a 7-letter word.
Okay. We'll get that straight. A 7-letter word.
It is a 4-letter word. It's a 4-letter, 7-letter word, right?
It is, because of the reality is when someone says, hey, we're coming in with a high density development, what's everyone's reaction when someone, it's like the pitchforks come out and we say, kill the beast. You know, everyone comes out with their pitchforks and it's time to go up the mountain and Gaston's leading the charge to slay the beast. It's like that ugly, horrible developer coming in, ruining our town. And that's how pretty much all of us feel about it. Now, why do we feel that way when we hear there's a high density development coming in?
Well, I mean, it goes, I think ultimately it's about understanding what the outputs are. That's what people are responding to. They're responding to their experience in regard to the outputs of development patterns. Where zoning is regulating use and density being one of the primary metrics of measurement, people have an understanding, I guess, spatially, what it means when you say this project is going to be 4 units an acre. This project is 6. This project is 8. They have a general sense and awareness through their own experience, albeit it's not rooted in the details. It's what their experience is, and being uncomfortable with the idea that the empty property adjacent to their neighborhood is going to come in and deliver something that is not quite what they are, and because of that, it's gonna just completely rock their world, and dogs and cats are going to live together, and it's going to create unhappiness for the eternities.
Sensing a Ghostbusters reference in there. So how do I put this? So density, people have a visceral reaction because their current experience with most high density stuff that comes and replaces that greenfield that they were used to.
Well, let's make it clear. It's not just high density. People will actually fight against what they are, what they live in. Their neighborhood is the easy math is to look at it and say, okay, well, half-acre lots, that's 2 units an acre. Mm-hmm. Third-acre lots, 3 units an acre. Quarter-acre lots is 4 units an acre. They could live in a 4-unit an acre neighborhood, and a 4-unit an acre neighborhood is being planned and designed to go next door, and they will come out in mass to fight what it is they actually are. So it's not just high. It's just, to me, it really it speaks to the visceral reaction to what the suburban development pattern actually is. That's what they're responding to, and what they are able to latch onto, because they understand it probably at a precursory level. That there is a number that's assigned to the zoning that says what's going to be emitted is relative to this number. That's the relationship.
Okay, so here's an interesting thing. And I'm trying to, as we're talking, my brain is going in all sorts of different directions. And one of those directions is like you could have 10 acres and you're doing 4 units an acre, and that can look very, very, very different.
Yes.
Because a city could say, oh, we want 9 acres of that as open space in some sort of master development agreement. When some developer comes in and says, oh, you have to have 9 acres of open space or 90% open space.
You're putting 40 units on 1 acre.
On 1 acre, which then is going to be 7 stories tall or so. And all of a sudden it's the whole kind of modernist, I don't know, what was the Garden City movement? Or there was a City Beautiful movement and a Garden City movement. And it was almost like Corbusier's plan for Paris, where he just had all these towers in a park and stuff. And it's like, that's what you end up doing is a super modernist thing, because you think, well, green space and open space is the ends. And the more open space, the better. We begin to like conflate and equate open space or things with other things that aren't actually equatable.
Yeah.
So how on earth does an average person who isn't in this realm, and the reality is, until you're in this realm, just accept that you're not going to know everything about the nuances of all this stuff, because it is hard to understand all of the things that go into how development actually happens. It's an immense amount of just stuff to know, and how you can affect change in your own neighborhood so that good stuff begins to happen rather than the same old. And so I guess the question in all of this is how does an average person in all reality begin to understand the consequences of the zoning code and the density requirements and all these things in their own municipality, their own cities, and their own everything?
Well, I think a quick way of doing it is to get a better understanding of what the number represents, because that's typically what people are responding to is the number, the dwelling units per acre. There's a wonderful book called Visualizing Density that was done by a woman named Julie Campoli. It is purely visual, and it allows you to look at imagery that is showing density from, basically larger than 1 acre lots all the way up to, tall apartment buildings in downtowns. And I think what it does is it helps to provide a spatial reference as to what the number means. Because to the point you made earlier, Clayton, the number isn't the enemy. It's what the collective governance that determines the output. Because you can have terrible low density.
Yeah.
But you can have absolutely magical low density. Yeah. And that goes all the way up to the scale.
Yeah.
Medium, high, so on. But it's understanding that it's not simply a design exercise of, well, it just must have been designed poorly. No, there are all sorts of other rules that determine the path that the designer has to take to even be able to develop. And unfortunately, the way that the system is built, it starts with policy. Design doesn't get to do anything until policy takes its whacks at what the output is going to be. And my belief is that design should happen, and then you codify the design. You create the zoning.
So you create the policy based on
after
the design.
Yes. This is what you and I did on a project.
Yeah.
We allowed the land to inform the design and the code to codify the design.
Mm-hmm.
And that in that way, you have greater assurances to what the outcome is. Because that's the other part of the torch and pitchforks is you don't necessarily understand what the output is going to be You might be sitting in a city council meeting and the developer's making their pitch, and they're showing renderings that maybe look decent, but everybody understands that bait and switch happens all the time. Here's the rendering. Here's what actually happened.
Okay, I have a story on this, then we'll get back.
Yeah.
So one of my first jobs in architecture, I worked for a guy by the name of Rick Kinnetetter, who is one of the most amazing architectural kind of renderers around our area. And I built models for him. I wasn't good enough artist to help paint or anything, but I built study models and display models and things for real estate projects. And he said to me one time that there was more than one mayor and city council person who came up to him over the years and said, when we saw that rendering, you made it look really, really good, but it just didn't look like the painting. And that happens so often, is that bait and switch. And in the architectural profession, that's what our job is to present something. Here's what it could potentially look like.
Right.
And they're just conceptual.
Right.
And it does take the execution of everyone on board to actually make it look like that.
But think about what your design process is with a project.
Mm-hmm.
And the work that you have to do to understand what the constraints are associated with your design. You have zoning that's leaning in and saying, thou shall not do these things. And then you as a designer understand, well, if I can't do this, this, and this, the output is going to be something that is less than stellar. I don't feel good about that. But that's how the system currently is constructed.
Is that how it was always constructed? Or was it what was it like in the early 1900s in the U.S.?
Well, zoning comes from a place, and this is where some of the history I think is important. The intent with zoning when it was, we'll say, founded is solid, because it was a point of time where the United States was industrializing. And in that industrialization, things were pretty dirty. They were unhealthy. And when you look at where the regulation of use and density comes from, it comes from regulating use. So you're not putting a glue factory next to grandma's house. And it's coming from a place of density that you're not creating tenement housing. Because in both of those, you're creating unhealthy conditions. But what has happened over time is zoning has become hypersensitive to the very things that it was regulating for the purposes of addressing health. As an example, when you look at residential zoning codes in any city in this country, you will find anywhere from, let's say, 6 to 20 classifications of residential zoning.
Mm-hmm.
It's, at the end of the day, it's residential.
Yeah.
But what you're doing is you're saying homes of certain sizes can only be together with other homes of the same size.
Yeah, this is interesting. And so anyone who hasn't read a zoning code before, what do those zones look like? I'm in a what kind of zone? An R, residential, an R1,
so,
R2, an R.
So, I mean, it depends on the city. They'll try and come up with really fun names for them, but in a lot of zoning codes, residential zoning codes, which is where I spend most of my time, the cadence will be R for residential, followed by a number that represents the number of units that are allowed on a lot, 1, 2, 3, 4, mm-hmm. followed by another number that is representative of the size of the lot. So an R18 means you're putting one home on an 8,000 square foot lot. But when you're laying that zoning down on a piece of ground, you're zoning R18 on 30 acres.
Yeah.
And so the only thing that's being emitted on that 30 acres are 8,000 square foot lots.
Which is interesting because how many people can afford that particular thing?
Right.
And so, okay, so let's go down that dark path, shall we?
Let's do it.
Okay, so density, zoning, housing, what's produced. this is interesting because back in the day, there was something called redlining in terms of like segregation within the U.S.
Yeah.
And I guarantee that segregation existed everywhere on the planet. It was just depends on who the majority didn't want to be around in their neighborhood.
Right.
And those things, which are injustices. For instance, when I was in grad school, I did a whole like project on the ghetto in Rome over the years, and it's like, what did it look like prior, BC? What did it look like AD, and over the centuries?
Yeah.
And so I had to do this overlay of the Jewish ghetto. And so even back in ancient Roman times, all the Jews were gathered into one section of the city, and it was a really crappy part of the city right next to the Tiber River, and et cetera, et cetera. And that type of kind of segregation has always existed in every society, everywhere it is. And what we've tried to do today is like this democratizing of the whole thing in a multicultural, pluralistic society.
Yeah.
But it leads to some issues. But what zoning has done is what? It allows us to.
Well, so what has occurred over time? You brought up redlining. What has occurred over time is their limitations have been placed on the ability to segregate in the country. Zoning is absolutely a culprit in being a tool to segregate since its inception. Those abilities have slowly been taken away, but there's one that still exists,
which is
economic
segregation.
Economic segregation is alive and well in the United States. Meaning, if you can't afford a particular home in a particular neighborhood, you're excluded from the neighborhood. And since housing is, in essence, segregated from other types of housing, what that means is.
And how are they segregated from other types of housing again?
Well, by the size of the property and the home itself,
which is defined in the zoning code, the municipal zoning code.
Yeah,
the R18.
Yeah, you take 20. I mean, what are the costs associated with a residential property? It's the land, and it's the building, and the accessories to the building, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, depending upon what those components are associated with a given lot in a given neighborhood, is going to determine a price tag. And based on what you're able to afford will determine whether you can or cannot live in that neighborhood. And so what that means is that you're creating neighborhoods. And, I facetiously like to equate it to where people shop based on their income. You're creating Dollar General, Walmart, Target, Nordstrom neighborhoods.
Uh-huh.
The idea of creating a neighborhood where all these people are shopping at different stores but living in the same neighborhood, that's a different exercise. That is the exception to the rule. It's where and ironically, it's what the market is demanding, but the system won't allow for the delivery of it.
Okay, so let's I don't know, play devil's advocate in a little bit. What are the advantages to segregated zoning where you actually isolate people of different income classes to different places? There's got to be an advantage, otherwise we wouldn't be doing it all the time.
I think I guess it's hard for me to put myself in that place because I just don't think that way.
Well, I'm going to force you to try to.
So I would say
flexible here.
I would say that one advantage is that you're living amongst your people.
Okay, quote unquote, your people.
Yeah, it's who you are, and granted, I think everyone to a certain degree you're more comfortable with those that are the closest to who you are.
Yeah.
But that is diminishing the opportunity of personal growth if I'm always around people that are exactly like me.
Yeah. What about financing? Is there any advantage for banks.
Yes, there are advantages because it makes the job very easy and streamlined for to be able to lend money for those mortgages, because you have comparables all over the place. Everything's a comparable.
Right. And so if you actually mix all the different housing types together,
it's a little more challenging to get your comps.
Yeah.
It happens, it gets done, but typically it takes time because you have to create the comps in the neighborhood for the others to be able to make the comparable. But yes, it streamlines the financing process because everything's the same commodity.
Right.
And if everything's the same commodity, it's easy to, the rules of appraisal say, if the properties are identical, you're simply identifying the differences and either adding to or taking away from to determine its value. But if the baseline is exactly the same, if the lot is the same size and it's the same house plan, but this one has a jetted tub in the master bathroom and this one has marble countertops, you just make those adjustments and you've got your value.
Yeah. As the architect in all of this, it's really interesting because I always try to convey the idea to my clients that the value of the home is more than the sticks and the bricks. It's the actual design of the home, the composition of the home, and how you experience the home. And then your marble countertops or whatever they are, it's like they could be quartzite, marble, granite, or whatever you want. And it will adjust your experience in the home, but only to a degree if the thing is designed right.
Yeah.
But it does have an effect. So density. It's interesting because we still do this. Everyone still does this in terms of the delivery, the product delivery. I don't know why we are so incapable of getting out of it. How we can be like how I don't know how.
Give you some thoughts.
Okay, give me some thoughts. Why can't we get out of? Because we hate density. We hate replacing nature, which is beautiful, with something that's ugly. And so there's got to be a level of incompetency on architects. They're a huge part of this whole thing in terms of being able to deliver something that is also, I'll say, objectively beautiful, so that when the thing that gets built that replaces nature is just as beautiful as the nature is that it was replacing, so that people go back and look at it like, well, that's not bad. That actually improves the thing.
Fair trade.
Fair trade. That rarely happens. And so why can't we change the zoning easier?
If you look at all the different industries that make up the delivery of the current development pattern, the default development pattern,
which are,
well, I mean, there's design, there's the developer, there's the I guess the end user, there's the engineers. All of those have built a system. Well, and then there's the regulation. Let's not leave that out because that's the starting point.
Yeah.
They have all built a system based on what the system delivers. It's a commoditized system. It's an assembly line, albeit it's a little bit more complex than building a car. But you're still, at the end of the day, you're building widgets.
Mm-hmm.
You're asking every one of those participants in that delivery system to change.
Okay.
And
right, because the delivery system has set up a conveyor belt that delivers particular widget A, and you're essentially, with a new zoning thing, taking everyone's profession, turning the entire assembly line on its head.
You're turning it inside out.
We're not building widget A anymore.
No.
Or B through Z.
You're having to retool the factory.
Retool the entire factory to deliver a different widget. And that is why it is so difficult to get good design.
Yeah. And I think this is I guess my personal take on this. The when you look at who sits in the chairs of making the decisions, it's not Gen X. So we're starting to talk conspiracy theory.
Let's talk conspiracy theories, because in this whole density
the baby
thing,
boomers control.
what,
They
8%?
control the seats.
70 or 80% of land.
I'm just talking about the decision makers, those that control the seats that say, are we going to retool the factory or not?
Yeah.
And then think about what that means to them in their position as the decision maker if you're going to retool.
The tool's been working so far. Why would we change the tool?
Well, there's some, self-preservation going on to protect the system as it sits.
Because this could take a lot of mental gymnastics to retool it.
And it's not an easy thing. It's the feedback loops within real estate are extremely long.
Yeah.
And take a lot of time.
Yeah.
And the public, the pinnacle of this is the zoning, and everything else is responding to the zoning. But think of your own experience going through the process of changing a zoning code for a given project.
Oh yeah, it was 3 years, I think.
Yeah. And now you're talking about a major, not just one area. You're talking sometimes
cities.
about, it happens, it does get done. There are cities that will completely overhaul their system because they understand that it's critical to their, their economic, I can't think of the word.
Yeah.
They have to, they have a job of balancing the budget in their cities,
economic viability.
Suburban development patterns, they don't pay for themselves. It requires subsidy.
Yeah. Explain that one a little bit further. And because I don't think many of us understand this, where the cost of suburban development, because of roads and infrastructure and stuff, why that is so difficult to maintain in the long run.
Well, it's, you can equate it to other things, but let's just talk about it in terms of residential development. And in my opinion, the expert on this is Chuck Marone at Strong Towns. He refers to it as the great Ponzi scheme, in that what's occurring as it pertains to development is present growth is paying for past growth, because past growth doesn't have the ability to pay for itself, so it needs subsidy. And so to keep that going, it's a Ponzi scheme in that you have to keep growing. Your city has to keep growing, rather than just infill and redevelopment. You got to continue to go out to the edge.
Yes, because
and this is a density issue, because at certain density thresholds, the amount of infrastructure that's necessary to service a given home in a given neighborhood at a given density.
Can we break this down a little bit and quantify it? Because just so I can picture this in my own head. And so if we're talking low density stuff, we're going to say, I'm going to go straight up almost rural, but I have a paved road that is connected to sewer, and I'm on 5-acre lots on a paved road connected to sewer.
Yeah.
So that means I'm going to probably be 300 feet on property lines.
Yeah.
And if that just goes on forever, I'm at miles and miles and miles for, let's say, so 300 feet times, or 5,280 divided by 300 is going to be almost 20 homes on a 1 mile lane or something like that. And
you've got a mile of sewer, a mile of water. That's major infrastructure that is the responsibility of the city to operate and maintain. It might be, it's developer installed, but then it's dedicated to the city to operate and maintain in perpetuity. And they have to pay that bill by virtue of the property tax that's coming from the number of homes that's sitting on that line.
Which in most areas, ironically, is all going to be greenbelt if it's that acreage. And so the property taxes are going to be minimal,
Right.
like $30 or something, or
Yeah.
$40. And so all the suburban people, if you live in a suburban area, not a rural area, it's like you are paying for the rural area to actually exist. And so, yeah, I just double check the numbers, and it's between 17 and 20 on 1 mile of road to service the repaving, service the sewer to make sure it's maintained, and the water, the power, all this stuff. And we need our utilities because that's the first thing we talk about when you want to develop land and or build something on. It's like, are all of your utilities taken care of?
Yep.
Are you on a well? Are you on a septic? Are you actually connected to the sewer system? And so as you begin to concentrate those densities, like in my particular neighborhood, I think I'm on half-acre lots in my suburban neighborhood, which is where I would live. We now have in the same length in a square mile on a half-acre, so we're, say, 120-foot wide, 120-foot lots, 5,280 divided by 120 feet, or 44 now, so now we have twice as many people contributing to the same amount of infrastructure.
Still not enough.
But it's still not enough. But just as an anecdote, and to help everyone, and even myself, understand the consequences of low density development versus high density development, is it is way more expensive than you think it is. To actually maintain this. And so that's why some roads just end up not getting maintained in some of these more rural municipalities, because it just costs too much.
Yeah.
It is expensive to pave that much land.
Yeah.
Oh, man. So we hate density, but density is a requirement to actually subsidize the people who can afford to.
Well, I mean,
that wrongs.
It's a way of understanding what's going on. I think it's unfair to put the blame at the altar of density, because density, it's one of the contributors, but it's not the single contributor. But it's the one that's, I think, most readily available and the closest to being understood. With arguably still a fair amount of ignorance, because again, you can do good and bad density at any level.
Yeah. I mean, the reality is, like, when I traveled to Europe and stuff, like back in my poor days when I had to stay in cheap hotels rather than downtown, which was super nice, and I'd be staying in concrete jungles. And the reality is the worst of all worlds is ugly high density.
Yeah.
And it's like stuff that looks like slums, are just like horrible architecture, no details, just concrete buildings.
Yeah.
Essentially communist apartment blocks. It's like, that's the worst of all worlds. It's just, it destroys the soul. It really just destroys the soul. And it's weird because I'm making the connections we're talking here, where you're talking about segregation of use and quantity.
Yeah.
And so if I want to build, I guess back in the day, this didn't exist, and I want to build an apartment building because I need to house more people. You just build an apartment building? Like, is that how it worked? And I want to build an apartment building. You say, okay, how big's your lot? Well, it's this. And so here's.
How far back we going?
Just early 1900s, late 1800s in the U.S.
I mean, before the use-based system that we have today, there were still, they weren't necessarily policies. It's not like you were having to answer to a large governmental body. It was maybe
local.
Maybe it was your village founders.
Yeah.
And it was, it was a lot more organic in their approaches, because there was this need to have to work with and obey nature.
Yeah.
And the laws of nature. We didn't have the same level of engineering understanding and technology, for example. So buildings could really only be a certain size.
Right.
You had to work with the land in terms of understanding what the land could hold. You didn't have these engineering abilities to cheat nature and put a building in sandy soil, for example, putting in piers and things. That didn't exist. So you were working a lot more in relationship to what the land would allow you to do. It had a carrying capacity that you had to obey.
And the materials that you built with.
And the materials.
If you weren't using steel or anything like that, you had to, your limits were the physical properties of the physics of that particular material that you were using.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because I don't know if people have really thought about this, is like back in the day, a traditional neighborhood, we're not talking about new urbanism, but a traditional neighborhood, who would live where? And so you have your main street and so your kind of cross section of your two primary commercial streets.
Yeah.
And then who's going to live closest to those primary commercial streets? Because on those primary commercial streets, it's all the commercial stuff. And so if you're founding a town, who lives closest to that?
The merchants.
The richest people in town. And how close do they want their houses to the places they work?
As close as possible.
Why?
Sometime right above, sometimes right behind.
Right behind. Why? Because there's no cars. They're getting there either by horse or foot.
Yep.
And that's time. And time has always been money.
Yeah.
And so you have to, and so what is interesting is when you go to some of these older towns, and I've noticed this in my travels, is that the largest homes right outside those first two streets, those two first commercial streets, will be the largest historic homes in the entire city. And then those homes get smaller as you go further out, which was kind of the working class.
Yeah.
They would have to commute in, which just essentially meant a longer walk.
Right.
Rather than a 5-minute walk, it was maybe a 20-minute walk or a 1-hour walk.
Right.
And so this idea of a traditional neighborhood and the mixed use and how nature forced you into a certain development pattern, that's why those towns feel and operate, is because they were built based on natural principles and natural requirements.
And human scale.
You could not go further than you could on horse or foot.
Right.
And then when you were in a rural environment, you had to fend for yourself because you were only going into town once a week or so.
Yeah.
So you had to grow your stuff. You had to have your pigs and your cows and your sheep and your milk and all the stuff. Otherwise you die.
Yeah. Yeah. It comes back to understanding the limits of the human being and the limits of nature.
Yeah.
Those were the governing factors.
And so the reality, another interesting thought is like the height of a building. It's like how many, before an elevator, before power and all that type of stuff, before lighting, how many floors would you be willing to walk up on a daily basis? Multiple times a day. I mean, Mike, how many would you be willing to walk up? 4?
Maybe 5 or 6.
Yeah, at most.
At most?
At most 5 or 6 would be a reasonable amount of floors.
3 is probably, if you're going to have to get on the stairs, okay, I can do 3. Right?
And so when you look at like some of these old historic places in medieval cities and what have you, how many stories of building ended up being is a function of how many stories you're willing to walk up on any given day and take your groceries and all of your daily needs up and down the stairs multiple times a day because there was no such thing as an elevator. And so when you look at all of this stuff and the rules and laws and everything that regulates how we build our environment, density is not really that's not the problem.
No, it gets a lot of the blame, but it is, and it does have its share of blame to take, but not as much as gets focused on it.
Yeah, because it's hard to actually isolate the real problems in all of this. Yeah. And we keep shooting at targets that aren't actually the mark.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to define what the mark actually is, since it's a work of art, not necessarily some quantifiable engineering exercise.
Well, let's talk about the benefits,
okay,
for a minute, because I think, this is where you and I have had some conversations about this idea that where the benefits lie in density potentially suggests that we need to change what the metric is, because the metric of density doesn't really do its job the way that we need it to be done. And what you and I have talked about in the past is the focus really needs to be on the end result deliverable of the intensity that's created by the environment that is influenced in part by the level of density. And when I speak to intensity, it's really talking about that relationship that exists when you take the physical environment of the built place and you add people, and then looking at what the result is. And if you think about the suburban pattern, and you think of the combination of use and density and what type of intensity that creates, the intensity is very low. You take any use and you isolate it, whether it's office, commercial, residential, industrial for that matter. You're taking a use, you're putting it on an island, and over the time period of 24 hours, its intensity is very low, goes up, and then comes back down until the next day. Whereas what attracts people oftentimes is intensity that's more stable and stays up for a longer period of time, but that requires a different set of rules in DNA to allow that to occur. Because anytime it's density and use and the mindset of people based on their experience is to tamp that down as much as possible, intensity is, like we said, it's really low. When you start to change the DNA and say, well, what if we allow uses to come together? Whether it's a singular use like residential, where you're mixing housing types and allowing those housing types to reside on the same street or within the same neighborhood. And then you start introducing non-residential uses, and putting those uses in proximity at a human scale to the human being that lives on a street a few blocks away. The level of intensity over the time period of a given day within an area like that is going to be up higher for a longer period of time. Now that scares some people. Some people don't want that type of thing.
Which is great, because if you provide other places, other like housing types, then you can live in a housing type that isn't approximate to those activities.
If you like the intensity of a suburban environment, you have it in spades.
Yeah.
If you like the environment, a walkable, connected neighborhood, that's harder to come by.
Because the reality is, I think most people, when most people hear in like density, most people think about an apartment complex, right? Like a three-story walk-up, or a 6-story or 7-story, whatever, once you get into the economics of elevators and fire-resistant building types and et cetera. But that's, I think, the vision that people have is your standard apartment complex. Yeah. And that standard apartment complex it's a different beast altogether, because it's, once again, a concentration segregation of a certain socioeconomic class into a place that you have to drive to. Mm-hmm. And so it is concentrated buildings surrounded by a giant parking lot.
Yeah.
And if you look at apartments prior to modern zoning, it was an apartment building in the context of a neighborhood. There was no such thing as an apartment complex. I think the first real advent of mass-produced apartments was communism.
Yeah.
Let's be honest.
Let's blame Le Corbusier.
It really, in Marx, and it's not just Corbusier, it's actually Marx. Yeah. It's like if you're on that Marx bandwagon and you want to like jump on that socialism train, it's like, do you know how much housing there is in Europe to go live in that actually is exactly the physical manifestation of the values of the things that actually created it? That's it.
Yeah.
And so what we have in a standard apartment building is the kind of the capitalist version of the same thing that our zoning just happens to deliver.
Yeah.
And so with the problem of the apartment complex, to me, is one of the biggest issues to actually try to figure out how to solve. And that turns into just as much of an economic question and a financing question and an ownership question as it does the actual physical building itself.
Yeah.
Can you address some of those issues about the economics of why we do this, especially the apartment complex issue?
Well, it's a function, and we hit on it earlier. It's a function of the ease of operating a delivery system where you're delivering in mass.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're delivering in mass and the commodity is the same, it's much easier to trade. But when you're dealing in large quantities, it takes institutional money to be able to do that. To be able to trade apartment complexes that are, typically an apartment complex to trade in the marketplace, it requires, they don't like to go below 200 units and they want them to be closer to 400 units. Mm-hmm. It's easy to buy and sell apartment complexes with institutional money when you have them in those quantities. That's what they like to see.
And it's become commoditized.
Yes.
And so rather than that's I think boils everything down to, it's like all of us are just cogs in the housing wheel. And it's like the whole thing, our communities are just functional financing tools of investment.
Yeah. It absolutely has an influence, absolutely, without question. And, what we need are rules that allow us to think in smaller increments.
Yeah.
In my opinion, the best way to deliver rental product, apartments, we'll say, is in quantities that allow you to disperse it through a neighborhood,
right,
where you're dealing in 6s, 8s, 10s, 12s.
Or even ones in the form of accessory units.
Yeah, absolutely. Accessory units to me are hidden density. Mm-hmm. Typically they don't count towards a density number because they're tied to a principal building, but that's the way to do it. And when you go into neighborhoods that predate zoning, that's what you're going to find. There's my favorite example in Utah is in the avenues at First Avenue and T Street. And there is a stacked flat building of 5 units right next door to a cottage across the street from a larger estate home that is across the intersection from, I believe it's a 32-unit apartment building. Mm-hmm. All on the same intersection. It predates zoning.
And it works.
It works phenomenally. It is a premium. It's what people are fighting over.
Yeah. And I guess from the architect's standpoint, it also predates modern construction methods, modern. And so it has historical character to it.
Yeah.
And that actually does help.
Yeah.
And so this discussion can continue on and on and on. And I'm sure we've worn, I know for days, I'm sure we've worn everyone out by now. And so let's go ahead and like bury this one in terms of the density discussion. So, and I guess the point to finalize on is, or to wrap up with, is the density is not the enemy.
Don't allow the number to dictate what it's going to be. Mm-hmm. Don't overemphasize and put too much weight on the number itself. That's the wrong way of dealing with it. Now, it is part of the problem. We've acknowledged that, but don't put too much weight into it until you understand what the good and bad of the number are. And that's why, again, I'll throw out the book again, Visualizing Density, Julie Campoli. It is a phenomenal book. Anybody that likes to frequent city council meetings, you need to carry that book with you And when they throw out the number, go to the book as a reference to go, okay, well, what is 6 dwelling units to the acre? What can it look like?
Yeah.
So that there's what it can. It's going to show the good and the bad.
Yeah.
But understanding what it can be from a good standpoint, I think, is equally as valuable as understanding what the bad outcomes are.
I love it. So what we've done, this is number 2 of 3 in a series of 3 right now that we're just doing. And we've talked about what zoning was, kind of how we got here, the problems with density and the issues most people have. In the next episode, what we'll talk about is mixed use, the good, bad, and ugly about mixed use, and how we actually solve the problem of density. Because that's what we want to do, is get to the place where it's like, hey guys, here's actually the tools on how to problem solve this and make things that are just better to be in and enhance your overall livability. So thanks for joining us today, and we will see you next time. This is Clayton Vance.